So this is us.
Just so you know who's who.
Yeah.
All right, so Immersion, just so you get a little bit of background about haptic technology, everybody here has probably felt like an Xbox or a PlayStation. That's where our company got our start back in '93. So all the rumble pads out there, all the force feedback joysticks and racing wheels, that's haptic technology, and that's what we invented way back when. Since then, since the game controllers, we moved on to other things. Like you can see there in 2002, you've got this kind of exoskeleton, which is good for the virtual environment, things like Boeing. They're trying to figure out, can I put a tool within this unmade plane in a virtual space? And that would lock your fingers in case you were hitting something in the virtual environment. In 2005, we went into mobile. So we went from this gaming into other areas, as well as automotive. And that was the first Samsung phone that had vibration that was in line with, say, your ringtone. So you could have a pattern that is in line with what's going on for the audio, right? And that was even before the touchscreen phones were out. In 2012, we took this haptic technology from the gaming space and we brought it into the mobile environment. In games you can feel from Google, so all these games that are on your mobile device, there's motors inside the mobile devices. And we're able to use those to give the same experience of console, but on mobile. So things like Angry Birds Friends, or Grand Theft Auto, San Andreas, or Vice City, or Max Payne. You could get the feeling of the weapons, the explosions, the collisions, all on your mobile device. And then in 2014, what we're talking about today is taking that same sort of technology with the motors that are inside your mobile devices and being able to tie that into the experience of what is in video, what is in mobile video specifically. And Paige has a lot of experience with this, and he's going to be talking to you mostly on what that means for films.
So I'm going to have to set this up with a little bit of background, and I'm not going to go all the way back to the Stone Age, I promise. Film, like all narrative mediums, is about story. Filmmakers tell stories, information, wrapped up in a narrative, which is experienced through one's own imagination. Which means, for a filmmaker, story is more than just about the plot. The story has to connect to the audience. An audience should feel what the character feels. Better yet, it should feel what the director wants them to feel. About specific moments in a film, about specific characters, about information being presented, or even about themselves. A filmmaker's story is enhanced the more immersed an audience becomes. Through the ages, storytellers use all types of immersive triggers to engage audience in their stories. Around the campfire sets the mood. Stories depicted in paintings set up character and scene. Theater, grandeur, radio, intimacy. Each medium has its own means of telling a story, with the goal to trigger a deep emotional response in the audience, which in turn drives their imagination. The deeper the emotional response, the more immersed the audience becomes.
So what we're talking about here is empathy. So feeling empathy for the characters.
Empathy for the characters, empathy for the story, being able to put yourself in that situation, using your imagination to put yourself in that world. And this happens through our willing suspension of disbelief. We, as an audience, give ourselves over to the suggestions of filmmakers when being presented with a film or a story. These suggestions, visual cues, audio cues, etc., help frame our imagination to the story being presented. The better the cue, the more immersed the audience becomes. Over time, filmmakers have used technology to hone and sharpen those cues, and they've gotten very good at building those worlds and that experience. Adding sound so we don't have to read the text, adding color for mood, 3D for depth, texture for realism, camera for perspective. These technological advances continually build the immersive world for the audience. we, in our mind's eye, see what the person sitting next to us sees. We also see what the director or the filmmaker imagined that they want, what they imagined in the story.
So you're talking about the technology is helping to define or better fine-tune that suspension of disbelief.
Yes. And technology has been very good to filmmakers. Their ability, with this advanced technology, their ability to tell compelling and immersive story, and it's been great likewise for the audience. But technology has changed the way that audiences consume content as well. At one point, the only way you or I could enjoy a movie was to go to a theater, sit in a dark room, be completely uninterrupted and focus on the big screen and nothing else. And then along came TV, which at that time was potentially the death of cinema, which of course was not true. But it opened up new means of storytelling, half-hour, bite-sized bits of information or story with built-in interruptions. Movies survived, edited for TV, made for TV, etc. And technology and the business changed to adapt to bring the cinematic experience into the home. Now, then came along mobile. Again, another potential death knell for cinema, which I argue is probably not true as well. Mobile does present very specific problems to filmmakers, unlike television. It's very small. Audio is not ideal, and when you're watching anything on a mobile device, there are distractions everywhere. Filmmakers and their films need to start to adapt to this new means of consumption, just like their audiences already have. Mobile viewing of content is on track to take over traditional distribution platforms. So what can filmmakers do to keep their audiences engaged and immersed in the story they're trying to tell? Now, visual effects and audio technology is amazing, and it's still expanding. Is it the solution for media you consume while holding in your hand? It helps, yes, but there is a sense that has incredible meaning to us humans that is not being exploited by film. Touch. Touch communicates every range of emotion. It can change your mood. It can provoke emotional responses. It's deep, meaningful communication that can only enhance the visual and the audio of a film. Touch has the ability to connect the filmmaker with their audience in new and amazing ways.
Well, I can give you an example of this too, which is kind of interesting. Facebook has this feature that's called a poke, right? What is a Facebook poke? It's a message. And you send a message and you may not even see it for a month. 2 months may go by, this Facebook poke. But a real poke is very personal. I get into your personal space and all of a sudden you know, oh, I've got to respond to this. But it's that sense of touch, it's that interaction that makes it so personal and emotional.
Yep. And to use the sense of touch, you have to really need to know your audience. So what you see here is how the brain works when it comes when it comes to engaging and interpreting the world around us. Something catches your eye, you smell something, you feel something, you hear something, then you go through your mental catalog of what is it, and then do I like it or not, and if I do, how do I get more, and if I don't, how do I best avoid it? By understanding this ingrained and built-in behavior, storytellers can use that to their advantage. Take a prop from Star Wars, the lightsaber. When it's activated, a brightly lit sword comes out with this amazing sound. It gets your attention. Then you go through, what color is it? Red, blue, green, and then who's holding it? What are they going to do with it? Now, this is a homunculus. It is not a character from Star Wars. Actually, this is the audience. This is you, this is me. It's a visual representation to the amount of brain power used put to your senses. Now, notice the size of the hands. And compare those with the size of the eyes and the ears. And remember how screens are getting smaller and smaller, and people are holding them in their hands. Now, imagine you feel the lightsaber when you see and hear it on the screen. The emotional response would be off the charts. You would be able to further immerse the audience within the world you're constructing, hold their attention, provide emotional connection with characters, scenes, and even props.
Well, and I was actually the first one
That's
to
right.
make the lightsaber effect for video games, working with LucasArts. And I can tell you firsthand in the video game experience, when you're out there with your lightsaber and you chuck the lightsaber out, you've got the hum that's there, and then all of a sudden the humming stops because it's left your hand. And you use the force and you bring it back, it hits your hand, and it starts humming again. You feel the power of that lightsaber. And so if you can do that same thing for films, it really is off the charts. It's just like being within that environment.
Absolutely. So when an audience is emotionally committed, they are less likely to be distracted. They're more likely to remember and associate specific touch experiences with your story. Touch is a unique pathway to emotion. So what are some use cases for touch? Action and events. These are the most obvious. Any explosion, gunshots, action scenes. When it comes to sound and visual, it's an accompaniment along with what you see on the screen. After that, the sense of motion. You can make a roller coaster feel like you're going up and down, a car driving left and right, the texture of the road or the car spinning out, airplanes flying overhead. You can make the feel of the Doppler effect, which brings this into it makes this a more immersive experience for the person that's watching this and engaged with it. Texture. This is a fantastic element of touch. You can make things feel soft and round. You can make things feel slippery or mechanical and clicky. So if you have a character, you can assign a specific texture to that character, like Big Hero 6. You can make it feel soft and marshmallowy. And then with Transformers, you can actually feel when a character transforms from one shape to the other.
Now, we're not talking about changing the texture of the screen. We're not talking about deforming the surface, although you can do that. It's just not commercially available right now. What we're talking about here is more the period, the pulsing that you can do. It can feel very staccato-y, very sharp, or it can feel very rounded. And so things like, you think about sandpaper, which could feel very rough. Well, if you do the vibration very quick and very subtle, it could be like a very sandpaper kind of feel. Mm-hmm. But if you do a more pronounced pulsing to it, it can feel more like waves that are moving across. It can be very subtle, or it can be very large. So, for example, there in the center where you see the hockey player, you could feel a sense of when those skates are cutting through the ice, right? Or here with the robot, where he's rubbing the hair, right? It could be a very subtle feeling, like you're having the top of your head rubbed. Or where Paige is talking about the Transformers, where they are transforming like a puzzle shape, all of those pops and clicks, those mechanical feelings, can be represented just with the motor that's inside the device.
Now, the most compelling use case is to enhance mood. Using subtle touch effects that are not tied directly to what you see or hear, but they're tied to the context, to the scene or a character. For example, in a horror film, if you have a dark room, someone's walking down the hallway, you don't have a lot of audio or visual that's in the scene, but then you can add a heartbeat that you start feeling it go faster and faster, which builds up the tension of the scene and the suspension for the audience. We did something like that actually for Penny Dreadful, and when we showed that to the creatives there, they understood that this is actually a craft. This is something that you can use as a separate audio or a separate element along with your audio and your visual. From there, we went on and we did a Homeland premiere. And the mood effect that we added in that was the movie trope of ticking time bomb. So we knew that as an audience that the character has to get something done quickly in a certain amount of time, and so we had this feeling of a ticking clock throughout the entire scene leading up to the explosion. So the audience, and it grew in intensity as we got closer and closer to the end. Wasn't tied with anything that you heard. Nothing was associated, edits that were direct to, on the tick. It was just a separate element used to build suspense in the scene. This can also be used for unique character signatures. So in Jurassic Park, you could actually feel the T-Rex coming into the screen earlier. And that sense of motion can build up your audience's sense of anticipation.
But it's even more than that. So T-Rex can feel one way.
Yes.
But you could have a different dinosaur feel something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So now what you can do is you can, just like characters might have their own theme song, you can also make them have their own touch effect as well. These effects bring a sense of immersiveness to the scene that wasn't there before, and made them more compelling to both the creators making them and the audiences consuming them.
Now there's another point there. So you've got the audio that's going on in the film. You've got the visuals that are happening, the tactile effects, the feeling that you're giving there. It can be disconnected to set the mood. It can be tied to events that are happening right there in front of you, but it could also be tied to things that are happening next to you, behind you, these sorts of things. An explosion going off that's in your field of view versus one that's happening behind you, or maybe a door opening and closing that's out of the scene.
Yeah, and we'll get into a little bit more of that in just a second. So, now, the future. The future of content, mobile is not the only challenge for filmmakers right now. 360 video, VR, AR, these are all the future of filmmaking. I'd actually argue it's probably the now of filmmaking. The end goal probably being direct neural stimulation of something similar to the holodeck. But what are VR and AR missing that the enviable holodeck has? And that's touch. When you're in the holodeck, you can feel your world around you. When you're walking, you can trip over a rock. You can bump into a wall. The world pushes back. And touch is absolutely needed for VR. When you're in a VR experience, people are still getting dizzy. They don't have a sense of the world around them. If you have the sense of touch, you can ground yourself in that world and interact with it in a more meaningful way. When it comes to 360 video, so there are these innate challenges right now with 360 where we've trained audiences from first-person shooters to, when they go into a room, to look all around because they're playing a first-person shooter and they don't want to get sniped, or they're playing some treasure game and they have to find something. So as a filmmaker, your audience initially goes into a 360 video looking everywhere except for the one place you need them to focus on. So how can you train them to know where the important thing in the story is to look? You can do that with touch. As they scan the environment around, you can actually clue them in with a sense of touch as to where they should be focused on in the video.
And who here has done the VR stuff so far? Anybody tried things here? So one thing, if you've looked at the technology that's out there right now, there are many people that are in the VR space, and there are many different controllers out there. You've got ones that are just a standard rumble pad. You've got the ones that are two-handed, right, like wands. Sony's into this. You've got Facebook into this, the whole Oculus thing. And the one common factor that they have right now, just today, is that all of those interactive devices, they have force feedback, or they've got rumble feedback. They've got this sense of touch that they're building into the experience. Now, right now, it's based on controllers, but in the future, it's got to be more realistic. We're always going to be pushing for that sense of wanting to be present, wanting to feel like you are in that space, and pushing out into space and not feeling anything. If there's a physical button that's supposed to be there, you want to feel that button there, and we're not there yet, but that's the direction we're headed.
Absolutely. Yep. For the future of film, for the future of VR, AR, etc., simply touch is the missing next step in the evolution of film.
So I wanted to talk just a little bit about the kind of response that we've seen within the video content itself. Yeah. So it's more than just feeling the visual of what's going on here. It's how does the audience react to what they're seeing, hearing, and feeling. And the studies that we've done show that not only do they like it, okay, yeah, fine, we like it, and we get that from gaming, the gaming space. We know that people like to feel the environment. But in things like video ads, the short clips, what are we finding there in the studies? We're finding
brand lift, 5 to 15%. Engagement is up from. Do you have the numbers on that?
So I think. Yeah. Okay. So here we're showing that there's more recall. So when they watch a video clip like this, they remember the elements within the video that had some feeling applied to it, which is important if you're trying to get your point across as a director for certain points in a scene, right, that you want the audience to remember. There's a good correlation here between what they're doing in the advertising space and what a director can do in more of a broad film sense. There, in the ad space, people like the feeling so much, they try it again. They click through some more. So 59 more clicks for watching the content. Well, yeah. That's the replays. The click-throughs are off the charts.
Yeah. So I mean, and this technology is live and available right now in the ecosystem. We have a QR code here. You can scan this, and you can try this for yourself on any Android device. This Lexus ad is live right now. We have some Peugeot ads. We have all kinds of stuff running on multiple ad networks. And this is the foray into film, into longer format. If the audiences are responding to the sense of touch for an ad, imagine how they're going to respond with the sense of touch for a film or a story. And this provides such a sense of immersiveness for your content.
So we passed out some sheets talking about this app specifically. This is the Content Portal app. And so you're not going to understand what's going on as far as this sense of touch unless you try it yourself. Feeling really is believing. So really encourage you to download it and try it for yourself. It's only on Android at the moment, this Portal app. But if you want to feel it here at the show, after the talk, come on outside. We'll happily let you try it out.
And other examples of this, how it's being used in mobile gaming. So we have many mobile games on the Google Play Store, correct? And this is really your area of expertise.
Well, that's true. And also the app is going to have things like game trailers on here. So you can see what they're doing, what Rovio's doing, what all the game developers are doing for adding effects into the game. And it's very similar. It's the same motor inside the device. It's just applying it to a different media type.
Yep. All right.
So with that, I'd like to open this up to a little bit of questions about the different types of effects that can be done, the different media. Is there anybody here that actually does films, that is into films and doing the video content? Especially if you guys have some questions, would love to hear them. Has anybody actually felt content that has haptics in it on the mobile devices?
Oh, I found a question over here.
Oh. All right.
Thank you. I'm guess first, thank you guys for coming.
Yeah.
One of the things I kind of think about when I think, when you kind of mentioned touch and kind of haptics is similar to the evolution of kind of audio in film, where before it was all coming at you directly, and now it comes to you in terms of stereo, and you can put it locally around you. So when kind of applying this to something like VR or kind of 3D, how do you see something like touch work when if something's like, I guess it's like distance, or to not make it flat or kind of bland in a certain approach?
Well, you can add this the sense of depth. So the farther away you are from something, the less intense the touch sensation can be. And as you approach it and you get it closer, the stronger it is. So that can give you a sense of depth. If there's action happening around you, you can definitely have each of those have a specific haptic signature. And then as you focus in on those, they can be more intense. So there's a way to actually make the haptic feel a surround feel. It's not just a first person, what I am doing is what I'm feeling. It's actually your entire environment around you.
And I can talk a little bit more about the VR side of it. So there are many different controllers out there. I don't know if you've heard of the Glove 1. That's a glove that has 10 different actuators, 5 on the top, 5 on the bottom. And you can have gloves on both sides, right? And so with that, in the experience, you go ahead and program right and left experiences. So it's looking at the position of your hands. And it's basically the same motor that's in the mobile devices, but there are 10 of them on each hand. There's a possibility, think of this being a movie theater, right? And think about the content, say a Dolby track that has haptics inside of it. And as you play the movie, all of us in our seats, we've got our mobile devices, we always have them with us. Maybe it's switched on to receive a broadcast of the feeling of the movie going on. And maybe it's tied to your location in the theater, so that if they're, just like the sound, you've got surround sound, you can have surround haptics. So in the background, if you have an explosion that's going off in the back speaker, the people that are seated in that back corner, they feel the explosion more than the folks that are in the front. So you can make this haptic soundtrack that can be in a theater experience, because we already have these haptic devices on us when we go to the movie theaters.
Here, and then there's one at the front.
Yep.
Thank you for your discussion today. I'm wondering if you can talk about consent and how, given when we're talking about intimate moments of touching, ideally we consent to those moments. And so if we're talking about moments where we're trying to recreate someone rubbing someone's head, how do we have perhaps that discussion differently or more ethically if we're considering the ways consenting or not consenting to that touch may influence how we are designing these programs.
Now, are you talking about the VR space, or are you talking about being in a theater or on the subway with your mobile phone? Or?
I think either, because I think this question applies across those platforms. I think that
you want to talk about the mobile side of it, and I can talk a little bit about the VR?
Why don't you start with the VR?
All right, so Immersion is an IP company, so we think about this stuff a lot. We think about the future. And we saw an article, a legal article, that started this discussion about privacy and what do you do in this virtual environment where everything is more and more about feeling what's happening, and how do you give consent, and how do you set permissions, right? So what are the permissions that you're granting to the content that you're going into? And also, how do you keep from being hijacked in your VR session? You don't want somebody hacking into your experience, and you want to be able to invite people into what your experience is, not just have everybody, right? So we've thought about how you would set up permissions and safeguards. There's nothing out there right now like film ratings, right, for content, but that's part of it. And there are people that are already thinking about these securities and personal issues. So imagine if you could set up some sort of permission specifically for your friends, or Here's the biggest thing. The sense of touch is different for everybody. So some people can feel things very finely, and other people can't. So imagine calibrating your system for your sense of touch. Just like in your mobile device, you can set the volume on your audio. You can also set the volume for vibration. It would be that sort of thing for the content in the films or in the VR space. So first calibrate it for yourself, then also set up permissions for the content that you're going to see, just like you set up permissions for your kids, right? So if you have your phone and you hand it over to your kid, you don't want them to see the same content that you have. Is this better? Better, 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 better. Much better. Thank you. Does that make sense?
Is it working? Okay. So my question is, in video games and a virtual reality environment, I think the haptic elements are really useful for creating that presence. But one of the things I like about film is that I'm able to identify with multiple characters on the screen. So for example, the Big Hero 6 still you showed, I could identify with the boy or I could identify with the robot, depending on what I want. So if I have, I guess it's kind of two slightly similar questions. How am I able to not lose that sense of ambiguity? And if I have such a strong haptic experience, that's going to remind me of my presence and remind me that I'm watching. And do you expect that could maybe ruin the immersion?
So to answer your second question, no. When you're watching content, and we have devices so you can come up and feel this for yourself. When you actually feel that content, you're much more engaged. You're not aware that you're watching it because you have that sense of being there while the action is happening in the scene. To your first question, it depends on the director's intent. So if the director wants you to focus on a specific character, they can make that haptic experience for that character very unique. And they can force that throughout the film. If you want but it depends. If you want to have certain haptic signatures for multiple characters and they both happen to be in the same scene, well, then you have to find a way to balance this. The one thing you have to understand that this is a craft. This is, directors have to learn how to use this in the same way that they use sound and they use color and they use techniques for editing. Okay, editors need to learn how to actually design haptic effects.
Yeah, we're not talking about an automated process.
No, this is not an algorithm. You actually have to go into a typical post-production tool and design the haptic effects. And so you as a director or you as an editor are making choices for the audience. Just like you make choices on the color or the sound effects, what you leave in the story, what you don't. And so it's really up to the director to figure out what is distracting, what is not, how to use it subtly, how to use it forcefully.
Yeah, and on the ad side, what we've been doing for the creative on that, working with the agencies, you'll go through iterations. You may go through 1, 2, 10 iterations before they say, that's what we're looking for. That's the feel that we want with this piece.
Yeah, and one thing when designing this is it's about subtlety. Just like sound effects or music or score, etc. You don't want to bombard the audience constantly with this. It would be the fatigue on your fingers would be pretty terrible, and the experience would not be positively memorable. So it's about subtlety. It's about using this in ways that impact the story, impact the character, and impact how you want to communicate with the audience.
Yeah, it's looking for those wow moments. You don't want to be bombarding people with this touch feeling all the time. It's really looking for the places that it stands out, it makes sense, and it complements the story.
A lot of my question was actually just answered. I was going to ask how filmmakers, storytellers, directors, and writers should start thinking about how to integrate this other sensory dimension into their storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And is there, I guess in terms of like what you guys are going to do for the future, is there like some kind of education that you're going to release to like creators everywhere to
Well, we're already
help them
doing
adapt?
that,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, also on that QR code, so this is also a tool for developers, directors, etc. Pretty soon, we're going to be releasing a haptic monitor so that you can design effects on your own, use your own phone to actually feel and create those effects, and then encode that into a haptic file that you can test on that monitor and then distribute in the ecosystem. So the time to learn is now. Our haptic monitor is going to be released within the next month, and we're already training post-production facilities in LA, in Beijing, and we're going to open up one in France pretty soon as well. And typically we train sound designers on this because vibration is a waveform, just like sound. And so using something like Pro Tools or Audacity or some way of shaping the waveform and then applying it to the video. So yes, it will be available soon.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Why did you choose Android over iOS?
It chose us.
Yeah, so honestly, the iOS platform does not allow vibration control for the developers to work with yet. So they do have capability in their devices, but the programming function is switched off. It's a private method right now.
Yeah. Right there.
Sort of curious, is the goal to have this to be included like a sidecar, like subtitles, and the video player would then do the interpretation? Is that?
Yep, exactly. So we have an SDK that we'd provide to either an application or an ad network or a platform. And as long as that application has our SDK in it and it sees the HAP file come along with the video, then it will render it through that app. Yeah. And the HAP file is incredibly small, smaller than a closed caption file.
Hello. Is it possible in the future to maybe include perhaps different humidities? I mean, Hoth would be different from Endor, or maybe even later on smell. Is it possible?
So you're talking about like themes?
No, I think what he's talking about is this. So we didn't throw this in the original slide deck, but I'll show it to you here. This is a sense of immersiveness over time. And where we are right now is around vibration and pressure. Temperature is definitely on that roadmap right now, because yes, if something feels cold or something feels hot, that makes it even more real in that moment. And as you can see, going up to full body capture and direct neural stimulation is like the pinnacle of combining your environment with what you see, what you hear, what you feel, what the temperature is, if something can squeeze you back or you can poke it, etc. So I mean, yeah, that's definitely part of the future of haptic experience.
You know, and I would say, has anybody seen this facility that's out in Utah for VR, where it's a building that's been totally mapped out, and you put on the VR headsets, and they project in the space the real location, but it's all mapped over. So you could have a virtual environment that you're on a starship, and you've got your weapon and all this stuff, but the walls that you're seeing in the virtual environment are actually there, so it's mapped to real spaces. You walk over and you touch things, and there is a real box there, but it's mapped over with graphics, so that's where you could have a real button interaction. It's really physically there. So they're working on this kind of holodeck experience all the time.
Yeah, and movie theaters right now, I'm sure you've been to a movie theater that has they call it a 4D experience where the seats vibrate, or they're going to throw water on you, or that kind of thing, like Bug's Life in Disneyland. But that is what the studios and the theater owners are actually pushing towards right now. They would love to get people to wear goggles in the theater. They would love for them to feel the experience, have their chairs move around. The being able to design touch and haptic effects is a skill that every director is going to have to learn in the future.
One more question there. I'm curious about how advanced your sort of SDK is at this point. Like, do you, as somebody that develops in this, could I say I want something to feel smooth, and you've already sort of done the research, and you'll give me something that gives me smooth haptic feedback, or
yeah,
or do I have to go really low and say I
No,
want?
we actually have design guides.
Yeah. So we have a research and a UX department that has gone through and tried to figure out the best way to create specific textures or effects. Like, how do you make something feel smooth, or how do you make something feel like sandpaper, and how you actually build that in an editorial tool.
Or how do you change the mood?
And yes, or how do you change the mood? So all of these effects we've mapped out how to actually do this, but we're looking for creatives to figure out, is there another step to this? Is there a beyond here? Is there, an effect that our UX team hasn't actually thought of, and can they apply that to their story and really broaden this out in a new way?
Do we have any more questions? No? Thank you so much, Ben.
Thank you.